Since all the companies and businesses I have led have been around medical devices, there are things that are core to really innovating in medical devices, which I think can be applied and used in regardless of the size of the company. So really going deep into the need, understanding the patient or the care, so that when you're thinking of your innovation, you're really understanding how it fits into really making a patient better or the care pathway improved.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Our guest today is Maria Sainz, President and CEO at AEGEA Medical. Maria has over 25 years experience in health technology and commercialization of health products and therapies to market. Prior to joining AEGEA Medical, Maria served in chief executive roles for other medtech companies such as Cardiokinetix and Concentric Medical. Something I learned from our conversation that early in her career, Maria was a teacher. We discussed how teaching has helped her become a better leader and a team manager. Her secret to creating a great team is cohesiveness through transparency and openness. Here is our conversation. Well, thank you, Maria, for joining me today. I'm very excited to have you as our guest because you have so many experience in the industry. You have led a startup, you have successful exit under your belt, and you graduated from Guidon after being there for a little over a decade. And your last graduation role was the president of cardiac surgery. And now you mentor a lot of the early stage entrepreneurs. And I'm looking forward to for you to share your insights and a lot of your wisdom to our listeners in our community. And so usually I'd like to start with a little bit about your background. How do you choose the path of being in this industry? Did you know all along since you were in, junior high?
So no, I did not. Probably not too surprising. I was born and raised in Spain and did my undergraduate studies there. I came to the US for a graduate business degree. And within the offers I was fortunate to get after graduate school, a healthcare one was the most appealing just because of where the product was ultimately being used and what the value of that product represented. Little did I know that I would be a firm believer in that after 30 years in the industry. But it was literally that appeal of really helping people with a product that I was still going to be in marketing for. But the choices were steel buckets, diapers, or pharmaceutical products. And it felt like pharmaceutical products had a more noble purpose and a bigger impact. And I was drawn to that. Started an Eli Lilly and Company for a year, moved over to medical devices, and the rest is history. It's 30 years in medical devices since those early days in Indianapolis as an intern for Eli Lilly Medical Devices.
So when oftentimes when you go to business school, you have work experience. Was that in healthcare before, or that was not?
No, before business school, I actually was a teacher. So very, very different. I went into business school thinking I wanted an international business career. And what I found out was that my languages allowed me to work globally in an industry that really was of interest to me. So I somewhat pivoted in business school from thinking that I wanted to do international business to thinking about using the languages that I speak, which are English, French, and Spanish, for a more global career in any industry. And then healthcare became the one that I chose.
That's a very interesting career change from being an educator and then move to, going even from educator to business school, is quite unusual to begin with.
I would say so. And honestly, when I was growing up in Spain and when I was going through college, it was not that easy to find part-time jobs and then find jobs right after college. And I was able to actually land teaching jobs, teaching English at the time in Spain, which was a good way to actually work my way through the final years of college. And then as I transitioned for a year and a half or so into business school.
Okay. So that's probably you end up you spent more time in the medical devices, healthcare than you're teaching by now. But I'm sure, what are the training that you learned from your teaching experience that you carry through with a lot of you're leading the companies, managing a team? I'm sure there's something that you bring forward with you.
Yeah, there is. And when I actually first joined Eli Lilly and Company many years ago, when we were evaluated for our performance, there was something that their evaluation system called the transferable skills. And I would argue that going back to my years as an educator, there are some skills that I learned that have been able to be good in the variety of roles I have had since, many of which don't resemble one another.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them relate to people. Many of them relate to, I would say, communication skills. You cannot be an effective educator without good communication skills, but I don't think you can be an effective leader without strong communication skills. People skills, being able to understand how to get the most out of people. When you're an educator, your kids or the adults that I was teaching as well can choose to do the minimum to get by and get a passing grade, or can choose to really invest a lot more in deeper learning. The same applies to your employees when you're running a company, right? You can get the minimum from them, or you can really get the better part of their talent, their dedication, their creativity. So I think those things have, as much as the careers don't seem to have much in common, there's that thread around the people skills that I think has been a bit of a common denominator through many of the roles I have had.
So what are the tricks, or what are the skills that you do in order to encourage your team to give the most rather than the minimum?
Sure. So two things I think are very important. The first one is I think it's important to lead by example. It's very hard to ask people to do things that they don't feel that you can do yourself. And it's not about capability, technically speaking, but it's the hard work versus the hard work, the being able to be flexible versus not being able to be flexible. So I think you have to lead by example, and you have to demonstrate that you put into it yourself as much as you're asking others to put into it. The other one is it's around communication and transparency. And I think there are two things. I think you need to set the north. You need to set the tone around the purpose, the goals, the priorities. People need to know why they come into work, why what they are doing is meaningful. It's only meaningful if it connects to a goal, to a purpose, to a destination, to something that is really exciting to aim for. And then along the way, transparency. It is very hard to think that people would not do the best job they can if they don't have all the information they should. And I'm not naive in thinking that all information can be shared. I understand confidentiality, and I understand there's information that can cause panic in a counterproductive way. But for the most part, you have to enable people with information. You have to enable people so that they can do the job understanding everything they should. I am of the mindset that if you share information with them and they don't use it, they're guilty. If I haven't shared information with them, I am guilty. So the line can break for one or the two reasons, but the fault is on the one or the other side. And I'd rather err on sharing more than not. And one of my tricks is really trying to not manage hub and spoke. So I don't try to have just one-on-one meetings with the people that report to me, but I try to actually have staff meetings or a commercial group meeting versus a technical group meeting. So the 2 or 3 people that need to work together hear from me at the same time why we're doing what we're doing, hear from me why I am challenging about going faster, harder, or whatever, and share the same amount of information with all of them so that then they can collectively put their talents and the data that we all have to the best use of advancing forward projects or activities.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. That I'm learning something from you from this conversation as well. So, I mean, you've done growing up in Gaiden, and then leading a startup and sold a company, and then you have 2 more after that. How is it different from what you learned from leading a big company and then doing something that's more on the early stage company, well, mid-stage company, to try to grow that company? How do you translate that?
So it's a good question. And since all the companies and businesses I have led have been around medical devices, there are things that are core to really innovating in medical devices, which I think can be applied and used regardless of the size of the company. So really going deep into the need, understanding the patient or the care, so that when you're thinking of your innovation, you're really understanding how it fits into really making a patient better or the care pathway improved. The bigger difference between bigger companies and smaller companies is on 2 fronts. The first one is resources, and the second one is the perspective or the projection. And by that, I particularly mean the time frame. I think the time frame is significantly shorter in a small startup organization because you sequentially pursue one activity at the time. And it's only until you have successfully completed one thing that you sort of earn the right to shift into the next. So you go through development, then you're going to go through clinical, then you're going to go through regulatory, then you're potentially going to go through commercialization. In a big company, you're doing a little bit of all of those things in parallel across either different franchises or different product lines. I think the advantage of a big company is that because there's so much work in parallel, there's a lot of people around the table that have done the different things that can cross-pollinate. In a smaller company, the challenge is that the resources are not always the best fit for each of those stages. And a small company can hardly ever keep adding and adding and adding resources. So there's a little bit of a more clumsy way of adapting resources to priorities as you navigate through the journey of product innovation. Everybody has to wear different hats, and you do things a little bit less than perfect. And then again, while at a big company, you can think about what's going to happen 10 years from now, that's hardly ever a question in a small company. You're driven by the range of your funding, which at best, if you're really flushed with funds, is going to be maybe 24 months. So although you can project what a therapy could do, and there are lots of slides we've all produced that are very, very bullish as to the billions of dollars that can be generated, your execution is very focused on a much shorter time frame and making it through that time frame.
Yeah, and that's and I think also I learned that sometimes when people who come from the corporate and then they go to startups, it can be a shock.
Yeah, some people adapt well, but it really requires adapting. So in that adapting and in that transitioning, there's always a little bit of a risk. And I think although everybody, it's like the grass is always greener on the other side, and you get very enticed by the agility and the speed then you don't realize sometimes that there are going to be fewer resources, that there is going to be more risk taking, there's going to be more the buck stops with you. That may make you uncomfortable because you just didn't envision that. Whilst as a big company, although it may be slower pace and more risk averse, there's a collection of people that discuss an idea, discuss a decision. It never feels like somebody carries the big monkey on their own shoulders for too long, the way it can happen in a small company, because often the departments are an N of one, right? I mean, you have one person in quality, one
Right.
person in regulatory or something like that.
And you look behind you and that's it. There's nobody, just you.
There's definitely nobody to pick you up.
And it's harder to hide, actually, because of that.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So I mentioned earlier that you have all this experience and you have mentored many of the early stage entrepreneurs. What are the top 3 challenges that you see oftentimes that early stage entrepreneurs face? And what are your advice for them for those 3 challenges that you think that oftentimes they face?
I think if by definition, I think an entrepreneur, especially in our business, has insane amount of passion for either what they're trying to solve or the solution that they have envisioned. And it becomes something that often drives them to be more micro, and it's harder for them to go more macro. So when it starts talking about how you're going to tell the story of your innovation, it's a little harder for them to step 3 or 4 steps back and see the forest and not down to the roots, and try to portray that very bullish opportunity and that really outstanding sort of initiative that they're working on. So just trying to peel yourself from the details and put yourself in how is someone in a boardroom going to react to this, and how am I going to get somebody to say, yes, I want to bet on this. So that sort of stepping back is a little bit challenging sometimes for entrepreneurs. I think the other transition is when you start having to delegate. A lot of these entrepreneurs do carry the monkey on their shoulders. They have their own ideas because they've been living with the idea or the concept for quite some time. And if they're going to grow and be successful, it's going to take more than one, right? It's going to take a village. So as you start hiring the village and you start having to deal with different personalities in the village and how they work and not, that transition from being the one to being the leader or the conductor of the team, the orchestra, is always an interesting transition that requires some attention for an entrepreneur, because it's a very different sort of work style and even day-to-day sort of level of activity, right? I would say those are 2 pretty big ones. Sort of the stepping back and trying to really see your idea, but in a way that you can convey it in a compelling fashion, like the infamous take your idea and try to create a pitch for it. And the other one is this delegation, building of a team, letting go, feeling comfortable that others are going to take your baby and not going to mess it up. Not only that, not only going to not mess it up, I would say even enrich it, because you're going to bring to the table other experiences and other sets of skills that are going to make the sum of the pieces a bigger, better.
So how do you, what are the tools that they can have besides changing their mindset? Is there like a framework that, because I think especially delegating, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost like if they have certain things that make them feel comfortable about delegating, they tend to be more open about delegating.
So I think the delegating one is a tricky one, and I'll go back to really making sure that some of these entrepreneurs that have a lot of passion for what they do and a lot of commitment to the cause have to come to grips as to whether they want to continue to be the leader and transition into a leadership role, or they rather stay in a very, very high level technical capacity and then let the reins of the project go to somebody else. So I don't think there is a force feed into you have to find a way to become the leader. There is a come to Jesus with yourself and what makes you happy. You're not going to lose ownership. You're not going to lose the protagonism of having been the founder, the creator, the father of the idea. But going forward, do you really want to be hiring? Do you really want to be doing strategy? Do you want to really be doing pitches? Or would you rather leave that to someone else? If they choose to lead, I think the most important thing is for them to feel like they can trust their team. So I think they need to, in a way, they need to pick the people not because of how good or what they have done or what big companies they've worked for, but people that they can really work with. And I would say that applies to all of us in any capacity, in any role, right? If you feel like you can be yourself and do your job the best way you can because of the people you're surrounded by, that's a win-win-win for all. So it's not about, oh, I'm going to get this guy because he has this degree, that degree, that degree. It's about the fit. It's about building a team that is cohesive. And I think then it becomes a lot more comfortable to delegate because a cohesive, trustworthy team has transparency, has each other's back. And then I think delegating feels a lot more comfortable in an environment like that than in a cutthroat environment where everybody is I mean, I've never worked at Apple, but I would hate that my car doesn't let me go through that hallway or makes me jump 2 buildings to the other side so that I don't even rub my elbow with someone that may be in a project that is uber confidential. It's not that kind of environment, right? We should all have a very open and transparent way of operating in our industry to make it work.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. I hear one comment that was made by a sport team's owners, and who said that he'd rather have an A+ integrity from their players, and then a B+ capabilities in terms of the skills. Because I think, like what you're saying, is about the ability to trust your team. I think it's important. Segueing a little bit, oftentimes, you have a lot of experience with raising money. Entrepreneurs always like to ask me, like, can you connect me with the investors? Always, capital is always in front of their mind every day, every minute. What do you learn from your fundraising experience that you can share with us? What to do and what not to do?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit like sales calls. So I started my career in sales, and there is a lot of planning and understanding of your audience. So we often say have a couple of versions of your pitch ready, just because different audiences may be more in tune to something, but you have to do your homework. It's not about just getting a meeting. It's about who's going to be at the meeting. What companies have they succeeded with? What companies have they failed? There's always a way to appeal to them to at least get you through the next level by really selling to them, not selling your idea, selling to them, to you who have succeeded here, who had a challenge here, who have this kind of a background. If you are in front of clinicians versus venture capitalists, if they had a company in the similar space that didn't go well. I mean, all of those things are very, very, very important. And I would even say you have to proactively weave some of those into the conversation so that they know that you know your audience. It's not about not being surprised and holding it back, but it's finding an elegant way of somewhat weaving it into the conversation so that they go like, oh, well, she has done her homework, right? Just that puts you at a little bit of a higher appreciation that This one doesn't even care. She doesn't even know what we do, right? I mean, you definitely do not want to have that be the conversation as soon as you leave the room. I would do a little bit of pre-selling. I don't think you want to get in front of a big pitch presentation without at least getting some time on the phone, getting to understand where they're coming from, what are they looking at now, where are they. I mean, sometimes you realize that you wasted your time because you were there at the wrong time with the wrong group of people, and that doesn't serve anybody any good, right? And then I think there's two things. You really need to have a very compelling story about your opportunity, and then you have to have an incredible passion for the team that you have and their ability to execute, because bet on ideas and they bet on teams. As you just said, the difference between sort of the A team and the B capability, but A in terms of ethic, right? Well, I would say an A team can make most anything really go well, and you know that an A team is going to go through the ups and downs of any of these projects and be more successful than something else. So the team is very important, but then the opportunity. This is not about explaining in gory detail the technicality of your solution. That comes later. That is usually not the people that are going to say, yes, let's dig into this one further, right? It's about the opportunity. With opportunity, what people like to know is it's unique, it's big, it's proprietary. It can be so simple. It can totally change the delivery of care along the lines of what everybody wants now, which is lesser invasive, less time in the hospital, faster recovery, less painkillers. I mean, you find the little hot buttons, but proprietary, unique, simple, it can go fast. And I have the team that totally can deliver that. That in general is a theme that has to be conveyed in any of these fundraising sort of meetings.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think also in the world of like when there many of the companies that are looking for capital, people oftentimes kind of like the idea of getting money from strategic, but also oftentimes the other investor kind of don't want them to bring money from strategic. And what do you think of the pro and con of getting money from strategic?
I like getting money from strategics, honestly, for two reasons. First of all, because I think it serves as a validation of your idea. Ultimately, a strategic exit is one of the very likely exits and successful exits for any of the smaller health tech companies. So an early investment from one of them is a very strong validation. The other thing is, I think they are a good force on the board. Often enough, you're surrounded by venture capitalists, many of whom sometimes don't have a lot of operating experience. But very often, I've tried to put the strategic on the board on the spot and say, "Hey, at your company, you've done this before. How can I get connected?" So in a way, you get some sort of cheap consulting or ability to leverage the experiences of a big company into areas that a small company could use it, right? So it's a bit of a conduit for a much bigger set of experiences, projects, examples of things that have been done a certain way that can be used by having that involvement. But I do like also the fact that it's a nice validation that this is an area that strategics definitely either see as an area of opportunity, or the technology something that is disruptively very promising. I mean, whichever way.
Because I've heard people who saying, well, if you want a strategic, it would be nice to have at least two.
That becomes a little tricky, I would say, because sometimes you don't control the dynamics between the two of them. And often enough, if two are interested in the same small company, I would argue they're probably very competitive outside of the small company. I also don't want to create a little bit of a World War IV in the boardroom. It is not worth it. So I don't have a lot of experience with two strategics. I have a lot of experience with one strategic, and I think it can be to the benefit of the company.
Okay, that was I always hear there's one school of thinking, and there's also another school of thinking, and somehow people just stuck with what experience they have, right? If you have a good one, then you feel like, well, that was perfect. And then you have a bad experience, like, oh, no. So it's almost...
I have heard people like two because they feel that if you only have one, it feels like you're wedded to that one. But I think it's very easy to explain if there are no rights attached to their investment, that there's nothing really that weds you to them. That it's something that but anyways, I've heard that before as to the merit of having two.
Yeah. So, maybe we can segue a little bit before we end our conversation. Time just went by so fast. I did want to briefly ask you about your company now, AEGEA. Maybe you can tell us about what it is that you're working on. Is in women's health. Why you take on that particular the CEO role for this company?
So I had never been in women's health, and maybe being a woman, there was something that was in the back of my mind about one day, given how patient and care focused I am, trying to get to something a little bit closer to even my person. And that was part of what piqued my interest. But really what piqued my interest ultimately was what we are doing at AEGEA. So we are working in a field called global endometrial ablation. It is an ablation of the lining of the uterus to relieve women that suffer from heavy menstrual bleeding. And when we're talking about heavy menstrual bleeding, we're talking about women that for about a week, a month, cannot leave their house comfortably without really soaking through their clothes as they go through their cycle. So what we have, the bet we have made is that we can make this procedure a procedure that can be performed as a routine procedure in your GYN's office. So not too different than a pap smear, does not require general anesthesia. You walk out on your own 2 feet within 10 minutes. We apply hot water vapor, and it is the strength of that vapor that ablates the lining of the uterus that causes the heavy bleeding. It is through the insertion of a very small probe that is probably smaller than a mini tampon, so very atraumatic and not painful at all to the woman. And the application of vapor is a mere 2 minutes. So an incredibly fast procedure. Today, the procedure is done in the operating room under general anesthesia, and it takes 4 or 5 days to recover. And we are talking about women that are between 35 and 45. I think if you are one of those women, and I was one of those not too long ago, I definitely would have preferred to just pay a quick visit to my doctor's office and be on my own 2 feet by tomorrow morning than going under general anesthesia into the OR to get rid of my heavy menstruation.
And you guys earlier this year received an FDA approval.
We have FDA approval, and then COVID came. So we were on the verge of trying to start commercialization. So we have held off and let COVID sort of take the center stage. And hopefully soon after we start seeing less of COVID, we'll start our commercialization in earnest.
Okay. I have not done this before in my previous guests, but I thought I will try it with you and see how it goes. If you can say 3 words for each experience that you had, like the company that you work with, and I think 3 words seems a good numbers. You can have more actually. Guidance. What are the 3 words that you think of guidance?
Development, mentors, change.
Concentric.
Rethinking, negotiation, patience.
And Cardiokinetix.
FDA, team, governance.
Okay. Well, that's all. You mentioned all different things for all the 3.
They were all very different.
Yeah. No, that was great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I feel like I learned a lot from our conversation today.
Thank you very, very much for having me. It's been fun to have this conversation with you. And thanks again.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, our content writer, Casper Mossman, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.